and welcome to the Atheist History Club, a program that examines atheism and atheists through the ages from ancient times to the present. I'm John Rafferty, the president of the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and a very proud member of New York City Atheists as well. This program, the first couple of programs that we're doing in this series are dealing with a specific question, one that has resonance not only in the free thought society in America, but in politics as well. There's been a great deal said about America being a Christian nation, coming from the right wing of the fundamentalists in America. But is it true? Is America a Christian nation? Was it ever a Christian nation? Certainly, was it ever a Christian nation in the sense that Iran is a Muslim nation or Israel is a Jewish nation? No. But the arguments that it is a Christian nation, there are 5 of them that are being used by the religious right. They are that America was settled by Christians, most famously the Pilgrim Fathers, that Americans were and are overwhelmingly Christians, that the founding fathers were Christians whose intent it was to found a Christian nation, that our founding documents, from the Mayflower Compact to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution itself, are based on biblical law and Christian principles, and number 5, only recently has our Christian heritage been subverted by liberals and atheists and secular humanists. In our previous program, we dealt with the first 2 arguments. Number 1, that America was settled by Christians, most famously the Pilgrim Fathers. Well, yes, it was, because in Western civilization, in the 17th century, most people were Christians. But America was settled by not only by Christians, but by Muslims, by people of no religion whatsoever, by African slaves who practiced their own religions. And we took a look at the famous pilgrims and what their history in New England amounted to, which was a couple of 100 years of religious intolerance and even brutality towards non-believers, people who didn't believe in their particular Congregationalist form of Christianity. The second argument, that Americans were and are overwhelmingly Christian, that's true. In history, we have been mostly Christians. That does not make us a Christian nation. And we looked at the situation in the American colonies on the eve of the Revolution, where we found that, which Christianity are you talking about? There were the Pilgrims Congregationalist churches in New England. There were the Anglican established churches, for the most part, in the middle colonies, and Anglican churches established in the southern colonies, but not very popular, and being populated, shall we say, by the new churches, the Methodists and the Baptists. And four of the 13 colonies which had no established church whatsoever. And in fact, 90% of Americans in 1790 did not belong to any church. 90%. So, let's turn then to the third argument, that the founding fathers, the country's leaders, who actually wrote the documents that created the new nation, were believing Christians hell-bent on creating a Christian nation, as the historical revisionists believe, or would have us believe. And what about the documents they wrote, the Declaration and the Constitution, that are supposedly founded on Christian principles or even biblical law? Let's look at the beliefs and the practices of perhaps the most important 5 of those founders, the first 4 presidents, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison, and the man some historians have called the first American, Benjamin Franklin. Lighthouses are more helpful than churches, said Franklin, the man who discovered electricity and invented the lightning rod. Oh, and that invention, by the way, caused then some grief among believing Christians. Clergymen throughout the colonies actually condemned Franklin's invention of the lightning rod, they said, because, they said, lightning rods thwarted the will of God, whose divine prerogative it was, presumably, to destroy houses with lightning bolts. As Franklin answered, don't roofs on houses then thwart God's reign? Franklin was a scientist, a rationalist, and a deist who helped write the Declaration of Independence, presided over the Congress that approved it, and participated in the writing of the new Constitution. He had little use for Christianity. I have found Christian dogma unintelligible, he wrote. Early in life, I absented myself from Christian assemblies. Like many others, Franklin did believe that most people, himself not included, needed religion to keep them in line. But, he wrote in an essay on toleration, if we look back into history for the character of the present sects in Christianity, we shall find few that have not in their turns been persecutors and complainers of persecution. The primitive Christians thought persecution extremely wrong in the pagans, but practiced it on one another. The first Protestants of the Church of England blamed persecution in the Romish Church, but practiced it upon the Puritans. They found it wrong in the bishops, but fell into the same practice themselves, both here and in New England. Franklin a Christian? Not even a little bit. Do we really have to discuss the religious disbelief of that acknowledged freethinker, Thomas Jefferson? Because of the revisionists, yes. Jefferson wrote most of the Declaration of Independence, which has been called America's birth certificate. And the revisionists claim that that handiwork of his is chock full of references to God, from the laws of nature and nature's God, and of men who have been created equal, with inalienable rights endowed by their Creator, to the signer's own reliance on divine providence and on their pledge of their sacred honor. Well, actually, that's it. 5 words or phrases. Nature's God, created, Creator, divine providence, and sacred. No Jesus, no Savior, no Messiah, no Christian imagery at all. But, says legal scholar Alan Dershowitz, the Christian historical revisionists want to use those few words to turn America's birth certificate into a baptismal certificate. In fact, those 5 words and phrases are all typical deist formulations. In fact, those 5 words and phrases are all typical deist formulations, expressions of a benign but uninvolved deity who kick-started the universe, something had to, most everyone then supposed, and then left the universe and us on our own to work out our own destinies. Deism was the product of the English and French Enlightenment that swept through the colleges of America in the 1750s and 1760s, when Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and others of the founders were attending and forming their own ideas and philosophies. Some deists inclined to a rationalistic Christianity, some to materialistic disbelief, but most of them tried to construct a natural religion by the light of reason, totally discrediting revelation, miracles, and the supernatural. So, using reason as a guide, Thomas Jefferson went through the New Testament painstakingly, literally scissoring out every reference to Jesus' purported miracles and any other supernatural event. His edited Bible ended with the death of Jesus, a moral teacher whom Jefferson much admired, and cut out the letters of Paul, the book of Revelation, and the letters attributed to Peter, John, James, and Jude. Jefferson's deistic version of the New Testament, titled The Life and Morals of Jesus, was meant to be read by Jefferson's friends and was not published until nearly a century after his death. But that hasn't stopped today's historical revisionists, ever on the alert to utilize a half-truth, ever ready to succor the unsuspecting, to actually peddle the idea that not only Jefferson was a Christian, but that he published his own Bible, the Jefferson Bible. Surely, the best known of all the Jefferson quotes is, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every tyranny over the mind of man." It's carved in stone on the Jefferson Monument. The revisionists have hijacked that too, because of that three-letter noun with a capital G. But most people who have heard or read the quote don't know its context. Jefferson was roundly condemned as an atheist, which he wasn't, by the clergy of his day, many of whom denounced him from their pulpits when he ran for the presidency. Why? Mainly because they knew he was absolutely against any establishment of Christianity as a national religion. About such an establishment of Christianity, he wrote, "The clergy believe that any portion of power confided to me as president will be exerted in opposition to their schemes, and they believe rightly, for I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against any form of tyranny over the mind of man. But this is all they have to fear from me, and enough too, in their opinion." Unquote. Every form of tyranny, yes. But TJ was talking about Christian religious tyranny. After winning the presidency in spite of the clergy, Jefferson did indeed confound them by strengthening the wall of separation between church and state that was written into the Constitution. The first time he used that wall of separation phrase was in his famous letter to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptists in 1802, while he was president. Again, context is important. The Baptists had written to President Jefferson because they wanted relief from what they called the oppression of the established Congregationalist Church of Connecticut, the inheritors of the Puritan Taliban. The wall letter was Jefferson's answer to them. "Believing with you," he wrote, "that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, I contemplate with solemn reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should, quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof," unquote, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Pretty good answer, and one that has been quoted in several Supreme Court decisions in the 200 years since. But the Connecticut Baptists chucked Jefferson's letter into the round file because what they really wanted was to establish their own churches in their own communities and become equal opportunity oppressors. Separation of church and state. Thank you, Thomas Jefferson. John Adams, whom Jefferson defeated for the presidency in 1800, and with whom he carried on a long and friendly correspondence after both retired from public life, was a believing Christian and active, along with his wife Abigail, in promoting Unitarianism. Unitarianism, which the Adamses called liberal Christianity, denied the Trinity as contrary to logic and reason. That belief would have gotten John and Abigail hanged in Massachusetts 100 years earlier. Adams knew the history of intolerant, oppressive religion in his own state and region, and wanted no part of a Christian establishment in his new nation. About that new country and its revolutionary concept of government, Adams wrote, "The question before the human race is whether the God of nature shall govern the world by his own laws, or whether priests and kings shall rule it by fictitious miracles. Fictitious miracles. In his later years, Adams was satisfied that the new republic did, in fact, conform to the laws of nature. The United States of America, he wrote, have exhibited, perhaps, the first example of governments enacted on the simple principles of nature. It will never be pretended that any persons employed in that service had interviews with the gods, or to any degree under the influence of heaven, more than those that work upon ships or houses. It will forever be acknowledged that these governments were contrived merely by use of reason and the senses. Was Adams a Christian founder of the nation? Yes. A founder of a Christian nation? Absolutely not. Pop quiz. Who said this? During almost 15 centuries has the legal establishment of Christianity been on trial. What has been its fruits? More or less, in all places, pride and indolence in the clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, in both superstition, bigotry, and persecution. That's the fourth president of the United States, James Madison, who was even more important to the founding of the nation as one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, the series of 85 long, detailed newspaper articles that convinced the American public to support the Constitution, the brand new Constitution, and in which the word God appears exactly twice. And both times, Gore Vidal once said, in the sense of God only knows. Ignoring the fact that Madison became more and more a deist as he matured, and a Unitarian through his friendship with the Adamses, today's revisionists have loudly proclaimed Madison's Christian faith and practice in his youth. It's true. Madison came home to Virginia from the College of New Jersey as an Orthodox Christian. But almost immediately, David Holmes says in The Faith of the Founding Fathers, Madison witnessed the persecution and jailing of religious dissenters by the established church, his church. At the age of 22, Madison became a convert to religious freedom, believing and arguing that only liberty of conscience could guarantee civil and political liberty. When Virginia adopted a new constitution in 1776, Madison insisted that it guarantee freedom of conscience rather than mere toleration. And in 1785, he wrote the Memorial and Remonstrance against Religious Assessments, which advanced 15 arguments why government should not support religion, and which was the precursor to the Constitution's First Amendment. In 1811, when he was president, the House of Representatives presented him with what President George W. Bush would today call a bill for faith-based initiatives. Madison vetoed it on First Amendment grounds. He was a First Amendment absolutist. After all, it was his amendment. Finally, let's turn our attention to the big guy, the founder himself, Washington. Listen to one of today's leading historical revisionists, Tim LaHaye, the author of the Left Behind series of novels that have sold in the tens of millions to fundamentalist Christians. Were George Washington living today, LaHaye says, he would fully identify with the Bible-believing brand of evangelical Christianity that is having such a positive influence on our nation. The utter, bald-faced mendacity of that statement is breathtaking. Washington was a deist and a Freemason. In the thousands of his speeches, proclamations, public and private letters, and private conversations that have been recorded, the words Jesus Christ never appear in the sense of belief, not once. George Washington was not a Christian in any accepted sense of the word. But why should that stop the revisionists of our cultural right wing? They have spent more time revising Washington's biography and beliefs than they have spent on all the other founders combined. And by time, I mean 200 years, because the Christianizing of Washington industry began immediately after his death in 1799. Some relatives of Washington claimed that he was really a believing Christian and a member of the Episcopalian Church in good standing. His widow Martha, who was a believing Christian and an Episcopalian in good standing, was not one of them. But what about that iconic image of Washington kneeling in the snow in Valley Forge to pray for guidance from God? An image that Ronald Reagan called the most sublime picture in American history, George Washington on his knees in the snow at Valley Forge. It's not even a half-truth. It's simply baloney. All the paintings, the etchings, the woodcuts, the two-penny stamp were all done decades after Washington's death by men who had never even seen him. So where did they get their idea? From the totally fabricated and best-selling Life of Washington, written and rushed into print by Mason Locke Weems in 1800. That's the same Parson Weems who gave us the famous tale of the hatchet and the cherry tree, featuring an insufferable, priggish little George telling his father, "I cannot tell a lie, I did it with my little hatchet." And ever after, millions of American school children who were fed that story thought, Jesus, what a little creep. But even if Weems made it up, isn't it possible that Washington did kneel in the snow and slush of Valley Forge every day to get divine guidance? No, not possible. Because he was a deist and a Freemason. And so, in keeping with his non-beliefs as a deist and his practices as a Freemason, he did not kneel in church or anywhere else. There are dozens of eyewitness accounts that testify to his upright position in church while most of the congregants knelt. Where else did he not kneel? In the army, at Valley Forge, or anywhere else. Parson Weems made up his story of Washington in the snow, complete with detailed eyewitness accounts that turned out to be utterly bogus, and was either ignorant of or ignored a fact of 18th century military life. Washington was commander-in-chief of the army throughout the Revolution, and so would be senior to any other officer at any religious service he attended, including the chaplain conducting the service. And according to military protocol of the time, the senior officer did not kneel. I presume that if Washington had knelt, everyone else would have gotten down in the snow on their bellies. Yes, he did attend church services as commanding general during the Revolution, because he wanted to set an example for the men. Like Franklin and Adams, Washington believed that most men needed religion to keep them in line, and keeping his ragtag army in line was as much a problem for him as fighting the British. In civilian clothes, although Washington attended church on occasion with Martha while he was president and during his retirement, he did so because, one, it was a small favor he could do for his wife, and two, it was part of the established social routine of an 18th century Virginian gentleman, the noblesse oblige of setting a good example for the community. Yes, he was a vestryman of his local Episcopal church at Mount Vernon, as was the deist Jefferson at Monticello, and probably Madison and Monroe at their homes in Virginia as well. I'm not sure. But that, too, was a gentleman's obligation in the days when only local churches, not any government, ran the schools and charities supervised by the vestrymen. The vestry at that time was also the local court, so being a vestryman was an obligation no man in political life could ignore. Not being a vestryman in 18th century America would have been like not contributing to charity today, really bad manners and political suicide. Because he was an intensely private man who kept his personal opinions very much to himself, he has come down to us as the great stone face of our early history. And the historical revisionists have used every, even offhand reference he ever made to Providence or the Creator as proof that he was a real and practicing Christian. Including, for instance, his farewell address to the troops at the end of the Revolution, where he cautioned them all to emulate our divine Lord. But remember, Washington believed that most men needed religion, not himself. And Jefferson knew that about him, knew better. After Washington's death, Jefferson wrote in his private journal that when some clergyman sent the brand new first president a set of questions trying to pin him down as to whether or not he was a Christian, the old fox was too cunning for them, Jefferson wrote. He answered every article of their address particularly, except that one, which he passed over without notice. Today we call that spin control. Now that we've examined the religious or irreligious opinions of the most important of the founders, let's look at the Constitution they wrote and the government they created when they assembled in Philadelphia in 1787. That is where we will pick up the next time. This has been the Atheist History Club. I'm John Rafferty. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.